On the morning of April 8th, 1981, a father returned home from his overnight shift to find his front door open. This was strange, but little did he know what he was about to discover. Inside, he found his son lying lifeless in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor, and his daughter, barely clinging to life, was found in her room, her face a sign of unspeakable trauma and her body showing signs of a horrific attack. Desperate to understand what had happened, he called for help, but it was clear the violence had been brutal. As paramedics arrived, they realized the true horror of the scene. This was no random act of violence. As investigators delved deeper into the case, the chilling details of that night slowly began to unfold, leading to a twisted mystery that no one could have ever imagined. This is the shocking case of the Alexander siblings. Karen Alexander was known at College Hill Elementary as a shy child who usually only spoke when addressed. A natural caregiver, the 8th grader dreamed of becoming a nurse someday. She and her brother were both members of Trinity Baptist Church. Unfortunately, not much else is known about the teenager, whose reserved nature might have stemmed from a difficult home environment. In stark contrast, Karen's outgoing brother Gordon was full of life. Energetic and daring, he faced more challenges in his 13 years than many people ever experience in their entire lives. Those who knew him described him as kind, gentle, and sweet, but years later, when the truth emerged, they would also add brave and heroic to his name. The two siblings were the children of Weldon and Vera Alexander. Gordon was born with a congenital heart condition that required open-heart surgery when he was just an infant. Shortly after, he suffered a stroke that left him with limited mobility in his left arm and leg. Despite these challenges, the determined boy pushed through, always striving to keep up with his friends no matter what. Because of his medical issues, the 6th grader had to wear a corrective boot on his left foot to balance his height and make walking easier. Although the boot improved his stability, its large, clunky appearance, often compared to a Herman Munster shoe, made him a frequent target for bullies. Used to overcoming hardships, Gordon did his best to ignore the mean remarks and not let them affect him. Neighbors remembered Gordon, who was always riding his bike around town nearly every day, his face lit up with a constant smile. Sadly, his carefree days came to an abrupt halt 3 months before the unfortunate events would happen, when he broke his left hip in a fall. The surgery to repair it left him needing a wheelchair as he recovered. Unfortunately, he never got the chance to heal fully and return to riding his bike, enjoying the freedom he loved so much. One morning on April 8, 1981, Weldon Alexander came home from his overnight shift at the Cooper Tire and Rubber Company in Texarkana in Arkansas to find the front door of his house wide open. Wondering why his children, 14-year-old Karen and her 13-year-old brother Gordon, had left the door unlocked and ajar after he left for work the night before, he stepped inside. To his horror, Weldon found Gordon lying in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor. Clinging to the hope that Karen might still be safe, he searched for her. In her bedroom, located near the living room, he found her lying on her bed, face up and barely alive. Shocked by the unimaginable scene, he managed to compose himself enough to call emergency services. When paramedics arrived, they observed that Gordon's body was cold to the touch, suggesting he had been dead for several hours. Karen, showing severe injuries to her face, was barely hanging on. First responders also noted clear evidence of a sexual assault, though no further details were provided at the time. The critically injured girl was rushed to the nearest hospital, but she passed away 3 days later without ever regaining consciousness. Weldon, displaying an unexpected level of composure, explained to investigators that in his shock upon discovering his children, he had picked up the weapon used in the brutal attack, a butter knife from the kitchen, without considering how it might affect the investigation. Afraid of being accused of the murders, he repeatedly told his story to account for his fingerprints being found on the weapon. The autopsy revealed that Karen had engaged in sexual intercourse at least once in the hours before her death, and given her extremely shy nature and the fact that she wasn't known to date or have a boyfriend, investigators concluded that the act was likely non-consensual. Evidence indicated that during or shortly after the assault, she had been stabbed in the right eye with such force that the blade penetrated her brain, causing irreversible damage. Gordon had also been stabbed multiple times, with many of the wounds showing he had tried to defend himself, proving he fought back fiercely. Tragically, the boy, confined to a wheelchair after recent hip surgery, stood little chance against his attacker armed with a knife. The medical examiner concluded that Gordon's body showed advanced signs of lividity, suggesting the murders likely took place on the evening of April 7th. Since Weldon didn't leave for work until around 11 p.m., this created only a brief window for the killer to act. However, it was also entirely possible that someone had been waiting outside for Weldon to leave before entering the house and attacking the defenseless children. In interviews with Weldon, along with neighbors and family friends, detectives discovered that the children's mother, Vera, had been in the psychiatric ward at Wadley Hospital when the tragedy occurred. Struggling with severe depression, she had been admitted to the hospital 2 weeks before the murders. Despite local rumors suggesting she might have hired someone to kill her children out of revenge against her husband, whether based on real or imagined grievances, she was swiftly ruled out as a suspect in the killings. Since Weldon had a solid alibi, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. As a generally upstanding citizen, he had never given anyone reason to suspect he was capable of killing his own children. Although authorities had heard rumors that Karen was being sexually assaulted at home, they needed concrete evidence to act on the claims. Without any proof, and with the father denying any wrongdoing, the allegations were dropped. While homicide detectives in Texarkana, a town of about 20,000 people at the time, worked tirelessly to find the killer, the investigation stalled when all leads were exhausted without an arrest, and it would take 2 years before a breakthrough came in the form of a seasoned killer who had turned confessing into a routine. In 1983, while awaiting trial for murder in a Texas jail, Henry Lee Lucas began confessing to a series of unsolved killings across the United States. Despite his unassuming country boy demeanor, Lucas was cunning when it came to manipulating law enforcement, particularly those eager to solve cold cases. Once he realized that confessing could earn him perks like road trips and meals at restaurants, he started claiming responsibility for crimes he knew little about. Far from the simpleton he pretended to be, Lucas would carefully study crime scene photos, commit every detail to memory, and then when it came time to explain his involvement, he would recall those details, convincing officials that he was the one responsible. Although he was no stranger to murder, most of the confessions he made during his time in the spotlight were entirely fabricated. When investigators brought up the case of the Alexander children, Lucas claimed that he had sneaked into their home one night and attacked the siblings while they were asleep. Given that he had been known to travel through Texarkana during his time as a drifter, there seemed to be no reason to question his account. However, detectives were thrown off when they discovered that he had been working in the fields in Florida at the time of the murders, forcing them to rethink the case. Later, forensic evidence would confirm that his DNA did not match the samples found at the scene. Not long after their children were buried, Weldon and Vera packed up and left the house where the murders had occurred. They moved into a new home across town, but life was never the same. In 1984, 3 years after Karen and Gordon's deaths, their mother tragically took her own life with a gunshot to the head at the age of 37. The house at 501 Barden Street, forever marked by the horrors of that April night in 1981, was eventually demolished by its owner after a series of tenants moved in and quickly left. The story was always the same. New renters would report hearing the sounds of a wheelchair moving across the floor and the screams of children at all hours, causing them to flee. Weldon eventually remarried and had 2 more children, a son and a daughter. He passed away peacefully on November 6, 2014, at the age of 80, due to complications from Alzheimer's disease. Having lived a long life, his passing was peaceful, unlike the tragic fate of Karen and Gordon, but thanks to advances in forensic science, the truth behind their deaths would eventually come to light. In 2022, former Texarkana Police Captain Calvin Seward, who had been one of the original officers assigned to the Alexander murder case, requested and was granted permission to reopen the files in hopes of finally bringing the killer to justice. Although he had retired years earlier, he had never forgotten Karen and Gordon, whose photo he kept above his desk as a constant reminder that their lives and deaths mattered and deserved to be avenged. Working alongside forensic criminologist Todd Sheffey from the Texarkana Cold Case Unit and DNA expert Kelly Dixon, Seward meticulously reviewed the events of April 7th to 8th, 1981. Blood samples, as well as the male fluid stains from Karen's bedsheets, were sent to the state crime lab for analysis. Additionally, scrapings preserved from under the children's fingernails were also sent for testing to establish any familial DNA connections. Although many of these steps had been taken before, advances in forensic technology over the years had significantly improved, and the new team of investigators hoped to make a breakthrough, a hope that ultimately paid off. 18 months after Seward and his team began their work on the case, the combined DNA index system found a match. In a jaw-dropping twist, the biological evidence from the crime scene was traced back to none other than the victim's own father, Weldon Alexander. While he had previously offered a reasonable explanation for his fingerprints being on the murder weapon, the discovery of his male fluids on his daughter's bedding was undeniable evidence that could not be easily dismissed. Additionally, traces of brass, copper, and zinc residue found on Karen's body and in the blood on Gordon's hands were consistent with materials used at Weldon's workplace. Fiber evidence discovered on both victims also pointed to their father as the last person to have had physical contact with them before their deaths. The sequence of events strongly indicated that Weldon was the only one with both the motive and the opportunity to carry out the murders. While the initial theory had been that a stranger entered the home after Weldon left for the night with intentions of assault and murder, it now seemed far more plausible that he had attacked his children earlier in the evening. Either unaware that Karen was still alive or indifferent to her pain, he had gone to work as usual to avoid drawing attention. After pretending to discover the bodies and contacting the authorities, his composed behavior and lack of visible emotion at the scene were initially seen as signs of strength. In retrospect, however, his detached approach to such a horrific loss raised suspicions. Considering all the evidence, the cold case investigators theorized that Weldon had picked a dull butter knife, despite having access to sharper tools, in a moment of panic. While an outsider intending to kill would have been prepared, it was believed that someone within the household involved in the crime likely didn't expect one of the victims to put up a fight. The picture the investigators were able to form from the evidence was truly horrifying. With Vera once again in the hospital, it was believed that Weldon had tried to assault his teenage daughter before leaving for work, a disturbing behavior that some suspected had become common in their home. On this occasion, however, Gordon had either heard or witnessed what was happening and rushed to his sister's defense. In a fit of fury, Weldon had chased his son into the kitchen, where he grabbed the first weapon he could find, which was the butter knife, and began stabbing the boy who had no way to escape. Realizing he had gone too far to stop, he continued attacking until the only witness to his crime was no longer a threat. With Gordon down, Weldon returned to his daughter's room, where he stabbed her in the eye, likely to erase the terrible things she had witnessed. Afterward, he went to work as usual, creating an alibi. With his mind already set on how the next day would unfold, he left the front door slightly open. No foreign DNA was found at the scene or on the victims, and there was no evidence of forced entry. These factors strongly suggested that the murders were not committed by an outsider. Those who knew the children confirmed that they were cautious when home alone and would never have opened the door to a stranger. When all the pieces of the puzzle were finally put together, the only conclusion was that Karen and Gordon had fallen prey to the most tragic kind of killer. A parent who was supposed to protect them at all costs, but instead took their lives to keep his own secrets hidden. On October 19, 2023, authorities in Texarkana confirmed that the investigation into the deaths of Karen and Gordon Alexander was officially closed. The killer was their father, Weldon Alexander, who would have faced 2 charges of capital murder had he not passed away before justice could be delivered. Upon reviewing the evidence, County Prosecuting Attorney Connie Mitchell determined that Weldon had fatally stabbed his daughter during a sexual assault. Gordon had been murdered both as retaliation for defending his sister and to silence him from revealing what he had witnessed. The fact that Gordon had tried to call for help before the killer reached him reinforced the belief that he would never have allowed anyone, not even his own father, to harm his sister. Though it had taken decades, 42 years after the tragic deaths of Karen and Gordon Alexander in the house on Barden Street, their killer was finally identified, thanks to a retired police captain who refused to give up and his committed team of investigators, allowing the souls of the victims to finally rest in peace. Weldon Alexander never answered for his horrific actions in this life, and if there is a higher power, one can only hope that he will face the full measure of justice on Judgment Day. While forgiveness may be divine, some deeds are beyond absolution, and in taking the lives of his own innocent children to hide his depravity, He forfeited any chance of redemption, both in this life and whatever may follow. It is deeply tragic and heart-wrenching what befell the victims of this case at the hands of the monster they unfortunately called their father. As we ponder this heartbreaking story, our thoughts go out to those whose lives were brutally taken and to the family and friends left to grieve their loss. If you found this video compelling, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel and check out our other videos. Thank you for watching.